segment of Shack Attack, and we of course begin in the name of Allah and send salutations upon the Prophet. As we begin this week, myself and Aqeel are happy to be speaking to you once again at a time that's quite confusing for many people across the world, and one might wonder why are we discussing American politics? We shouldn't care about them. It's America. It's not our business. But unfortunately, whatever happens there does affect everybody, including us at the bottom of Africa, as well as other countries in the Middle East as well. And you might ask yourself why, but it's because the American foreign policy has been synonymous with interventions in other countries, and that's just the way that the world economy is structured as well. That there is a world hegemon called the United States of America, and how united they are, well, the election results will tell you that they aren't that united, and that irrespective of who won that election, there were going to be issues. So this evening we're speaking about the way that the new administration under President Biden is being celebrated, first of all, as an alternative to Donald Trump, but not just that, that the problematic nature of this administration in relation to Israel-Palestine and their stance on that matter being called out by Muslims as something to be distanced from. And one would wonder, is that where it ends? And are they perfectly good people irrespective of that particular stance? Well, the answer is no. And our guest this evening, Amaarah Garda, tweeted about just that, in a way to say that your pro-Palestine stance doesn't absolve you from how else you could be a bad person or a bad leader or someone complicit in the abuse of others. And we're going to find out as the show unfolds this evening just how Biden and Kamala are in fact complicit in just that, human rights abuses, and that the identity politics of Kamala being a particular race group or gender group, and the first of her kind in her position, shouldn't be celebrated just yet when one looks at her credentials. So we're unpacked quite well on Twitter, I must say. We're going to be discussing this with Amaarah on the show, and so we bring her on now, and we hope that you stay tuned and please comment in the comment section so we can engage with you as well on your opinion on this topic. Amaarah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I can't say nice to see you, Shakeel, because I saw you like 5 minutes ago, but it's nice to see you, Aqeel.
Yeah, that come out.
It's lovely to see you too. Shakeel, take it away.
Yeah, so we interested in speaking about. I'm not sure if you were able to hear what we said just now, Amaarah. But the way that that the Palestine issue is central to much of our social conscience as people, and that kind of decides who we support and who we don't support. But in the case of the American administration and who took over right now, well, the Biden campaign, one has to also ask what else are they up to, and how is that impacting on American society itself as well as the rest of the world. And your Twitter account was a platform for you to voice your views on how we gauge the importance of one's pro-Palestine stance or anti-Palestine stance for that matter, or pro-Israel stance, along with other human rights issues when discussing and evaluating our leaders in the world. So we'd like to hear your opinion, and without interrupting you, we're going to let you speak for a bit, and then we'll jump at you with your questions. But how do you take, what's your stance on this issue, first of all, on the new administration, and then later on with regards to how the Muslim community or the pro-Palestine community, irrespective of religion, tends to, of course, criticize them for their stance, and are we overlooking any other issues in this matter?
Yeah, so I think, firstly, what's important to mention is we don't even know if this will officially be the new administration, given that the transfer of power is not looking as smooth as we would have expected. So we'll first see how that plays out. I think that in itself will be an issue that brings up a lot of politics. But yeah, on this issue of, a new administration coming in, I think a lot of people, and myself included, were hoping that this would be a chance for Trump to leave. And it's unfortunate that the person replacing him is Joe Biden. It's this whole thing of choosing between the lesser of two evils. I think it's something South Africans know well, and it's not something that you can be excited for. So what everyone has been, I think, explaining well to each other is we are happy that Trump is out, but not necessarily happy that Biden is in. And I just wanted to interrogate why aren't we happy that Biden is in? Personally, I'm not happy either. But I think when I engage with people in the Muslim community in South Africa, at least, but I think there are some similarities across Muslims across the globe. So when I engage with people about these issues, you sort of see that it's almost as if because Biden and Kamala have had some sort of pro-Israel statements made, sometimes more aggressively than other times, but you sort of see that people pick on that issue and say, oh no, if only they were pro-Palestine, then I could be happy. And I think for me that was really enlightening, because my list of why I don't like both of them and what they represent goes far beyond their support for Israel. And I started realizing it's something that my older brother always asks us, that do we think if Trump was, with all of his nonsense, if he was pro-Palestine, does he think Muslims would support Trump? And I honestly thought about it, and I honestly answered him and said, I think Muslims would probably find it much harder to criticize him, which I realized is really hypocritical. So in this case, I'm glad people are criticizing Biden and Harris, and I hope that continues, and I hope that we continue holding them up to higher standards. But I'm tired, I think, of people saying, if you are pro-Palestine, nothing else matters. That makes you a good person. You are fit for office, and we support you 100%. For me, that's not enough. That's not even scratching the surface.
All right. So I think firstly I was so taken aback, so astounded at this kind of Trump analogy you give. And what happens if Trump is pro-Palestinian and not pro-Israeli? What do Muslims say then? And I think you talk to something so incredible, which is kind of the sense of moral selectivism which we have. I think a lot of the reason why South Africans, for example, would support the ANC is because we have freedom of religion and we're allowed to put up masjids in every, hospital and mall and wherever we go. And, we're kind of allowed to practice freedom of religion. But let's get back to it. And I think that the focus up until this point has been, we're going to do anything we possibly can do to get rid of Trump. Now, it seems, at least, unless the United States breaks out into some form of civil war or Trump manages some, legal shenanigans, that we've gotten rid of him. And then the question comes, which is the same question you've been asking, which is, what now? And I was hoping that you could maybe answer some of that what now for us. What do we look forward to in a Kamala and Biden world? Because I think from the outside it seems kind of nice. I mean, Biden is was anti-apartheid and quite vocally so. Kamala has this very interesting kind of ethnicity, which is a topic all on its own. And so from the outside, it seems very kind of kumbaya, left field. But what is it, do you think, in reality?
I think, on the topic of Biden's anti-apartheid stance, it's also something that's puzzling to me, because South Africans, I think, were like, wow, this guy knew who was wrong during apartheid. Therefore, he's great. And the irony, now I'm going to flip the tables now. The irony is that in 1986, which is around the time of that video where he's condemning apartheid in Africa, he actually says that the USA should not be shy or embarrassed to be as close to Israel as they are. So, and you see, this is why it's so interesting, because even Israel's statehood is something that is not disputed by Biden and Harris. It's something that's so inherently part of their politics, and it's so inherently part of what they campaign for and who they campaign for, that it's really difficult to say, if they are a bit nicer to Palestine, then it's good for us. Because if you look at politicians and people in general, you need to be looking at their core values. You can't be looking at how they respond in one or two or three circumstances. There are a lot of people who were anti-apartheid in South Africa, and then you see them do other dodgy stuff, and does that make them good people? I mean, Gandhi is one good example of someone who was very progressive on the stance of liberation from colonialism, and then you read his racist views, and then you're like, is this acceptable? Is it okay for people who are public officials and are politicians and are leaders in society to be so progressive on one issue and then be so backward on another issue? And then you realize that it's because in circumstances their politics change. It's not because they are value-based people. Their values are not, we stand against human rights violations no matter where they happen. Their values are, let's strategically look at this. And I mean, Kamala has a very good history of that. When she was the attorney, the district attorney in California, she was really tough on crime. We know, the USA has a really big issue with mass incarcerations, which disproportionately affect Black people. She was, a pretty big part of that in California, not really giving convictions a chance to be overturned, not really allowing this process of justice that we imagine exists in the USA. And then you put that in context with her views on Israel, and then you realize it's because someone like her is comfortable with human rights violations. That's the only reason. If she said, I want the Palestinians to be free, you cannot say that makes it okay. Her record on criminal justice is okay because she supports Palestinian freedom. At the end of the day, she's not fully committed to human rights, and neither is Joe Biden. So, I mean, from both of them, I'm expecting a sort of a return to the past. Obama is another good example, and that's why I'm confident in saying that Biden is not someone who cares much for human rights. Rather, he's someone who's strategic, because obviously he was a big part of the Obama administration, and I think that's probably what we'll return to. So some sense of predictability. With Trump, I think we couldn't really guess what he was going to say, how he was going to say it, and it didn't seem like there were limits. I think that with Biden and Kamala, I think they are probably going to return to the normal, which was never good in the first place. I think we're kidding ourselves if we say that Obama's administration was good for the world and good for American citizens, and especially the most vulnerable in America. So I think that's pretty much all it's going to be. It's just a return to that complacency instead of outright human rights violations. I think it'll just be something a bit more quiet, something more palatable.
Okay, we're going to take a break now for a short we'll be picking up this discussion with Amaarah Garda on judging American politicians beyond the Palestinian conflict. Please stay tuned and remain commenting on Facebook so we can engage you on this discussion. We'll be back. Assalamu alaikum.
It's a new era. Salam Media, humanitarian journalism. With over 80 years of experience, IG Hussein and Company are renowned for their quality Islamic wear and goods. IG Hussein and Company stock a variety of Islamic items, musallas, kitabs, Medina dates, perfumes and exclusive gifts. We guarantee you a unique and friendly shopping experience for the entire family. Visit our new branch in Overport at 202 Kenilworth Park, Brickfield Road. Open 7 days a week with ample parking and wheelchair friendly. Like us on Facebook or Instagram at IG Hussein for our latest promotions and updates. IG Hussein and Company, your Islamic lifestyle.
What makes Randery Jewelers the optimum place for your memorable gift? Is it our range of exclusive, high-end, luxurious jewellery? Or is it our master craftsmanship of all your bespoke jewellery needs? We believe it's because at Randery Jewelers, we know just how to make your special moments last forever. Whether it's for a wedding, anniversary, or just a simple gift to show your love, trust Randery Jewelers to make it special. www.randeryjewelers.com. Make your moments last forever with Randery Jewelers, the family name you can trust.
Would you like to give Sadaqah 365 days a year? You can with the Al Imdad Foundation's Daily Sadaqah program. Donate as little as R1 a day for a month for each member of your family, up to any specified amount, and receive monthly feedback on where your contributions have made a difference. Visit alimdad.com and download your Daily Sadaqah debit order form or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
Salam Media, a global voice for humanity.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and we are back after that break, discussing once again judging American politicians beyond the Palestinian conflict. So we were with Amaarah Garda and we were speaking about, unpacking the sort of high levels of selectivity that we find in the history of Biden and Kamala in their politics, and how just being pro-Palestine, which they are not, wouldn't be the only factor one had to look at to determine whether they would be good world leaders. And they are world leaders, like it or not. That is the position that the United States has in our global world political system. So when people speak about them being the lesser of two evils, do you agree with that statement? And if not, why not?
I think I do agree with that statement, but I would say it's marginal. So I think it's a personal choice whether you think that overt sort of human rights violations are more, tolerable than the more sort of underhanded work that has been going on in America for years. So I would say it's pretty much a toss-up. Either you go for Trump, who pretty much doesn't care what he says or who he says it about or what other people do to other people, provided his people are protected. But I mean, that sort of attitude is something that I think he was just honest about. So some people might say they prefer that honesty. They prefer knowing where exactly the president stands. I mean, even if they don't agree with where he stands. But personally, I think that given the sort of destruction of the Trump administration, I think that it will probably sort of water down what Biden and Harris would have been if Trump was not the president before them. So I think in trying to appease internationally and also locally, I think Biden and Harris will probably try to toe a little bit more of a moderate line. But having said that, I think there's some non-negotiables in American politics. And I think that's why, people's fixation on this Israel-Palestine thing is interesting to me, because I'm not sure what sort of implied that America was ready to become pro-Palestine. As you know, the biggest funder of Israel and as the funder of Israel's military, you would be really surprised if America did say, we are not going to support Israel as strongly as we always have. So, yeah, I think that's why I was just harping on about the point that what makes them the lesser of evil is not their stance on Israel-Palestine. It's probably just the fact that I think because they are a reaction to Trump, and obviously because of American politics being this pretty much between two political parties, the Democrats, I think, are going to try and work as hard as they possibly can to prove that they are not Trump or not Trump-like. I do think that progressives in the Democratic Party will be really, really important for that. And the extent to which they are allowed voice in the party, I think, will sort of determine the trajectory of the party. But remember as well that America is really weird, and who controls the Senate is also a really important aspect of it. Who controls the Supreme Court is also a really important aspect of it. So I think to a large extent, Biden and Harris will probably have their hands tied a lot of the way, which I think will hopefully give vulnerable communities across the world a little bit more breathing space.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's I want to get your perspective on looking more broadly at this. And I understand that in certain regards, for example, foreign policy, perhaps attitudes towards Muslims or attitudes towards vulnerable American populations, immigrant populations, Hispanics, blacks, etc., might not change in a marked way apart from the kind of window dressing of the situation. But do you not think that there is definitely some shift which will be positive from the Trump administration on issues which we might not necessarily find deeply important to us, but in the broader scheme of things are incredibly important. Things like climate change, the Iranian agreement, what happens with the kind of international agreements and trade and things like that.
Yeah, well, I think that's why I mentioned, the role of the more progressives in the Democratic Party will be really, really important on issues like that. I don't think, given the history of Biden and Harris in their respective careers, Biden's been involved in Congress, Kamala was the senator. So I think both of their histories don't really point to that more progressive stance. Now, when they were running their campaign, a lot of their political views changed, which is, again, why I'm harping on about we have to judge people holistically. You can't say on one issue they say the right things, therefore, they are great. A lot of the issues they've changed stances on. So things like reproductive health rights, social security, even just in general harsher sentences and criminalization of different things. They've changed a lot of those now, and I think it's because, like I said, they want to appease some of the more progressive voters, but I don't think that they will change things that much. And I think that's probably because most of these changes that we want have to happen through political will. And I think the most sort of positive I can be for like great change would be on issues where the more progressives are very involved. So I think climate change might become something that they take a little bit more of a tougher stance on. But if we look at Biden, addressing climate change requires you to deal with the sort of big corporates and what's called big money in America. And I don't think that Biden's career makes him someone that's capable or willing to address that. So when we talk about addressing climate change, we're not talking about, encouraging households to buy recyclable materials. We're talking about tackling the pollution straight from the big corporates. And I don't see Biden wanting to change that. And I also don't see how the people that elected him would be okay with changing that. A lot of the funding that political parties in America get are from organizations and corporations like this. So I'm not really sure how positive I feel about those sort of changes. I think, again, I think that they might be more forthcoming and they might be more willing to listen to an alternate view, which Trump was not. So instead of saying climate change doesn't exist, I think they might concede, okay, it exists. But I think in their policies, they would probably not be as progressive as they need to be, considering America's role in climate change.
And perhaps the lives of Americans would change slightly without having a polarizing president that speaks in a divisive way. Whether that materially changes their lives or not, over the long run would have to be measured. And I suppose somebody within American society, from a sociological perspective, would have to look at, as well as the psychology of Americans who now walk around without a Trump president, feeling probably a bit more relaxed and not as suspicious of one another. But I think Aqeel had something to say before we close.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the one question I wanted to pose to Amaarah is that over the last couple of years, during the Trump presidency, America has become increasingly, more isolated from its traditional allies, Europe and the West, Europe and the rest of the West, and so on. And in doing so, they've lost a certain amount of. I mean, obviously, militarily, they still have immense amounts of power, but politically, they seem to have lost a certain amount of sway. What do you think a Biden-Kamala Harris presidency means for America's place in the world? And is it as we all think, where, kind of America is on the slope down, and we're starting to see the rise of the powers in the east.
Okay, well, I think first on Shakeel's point, to be honest, I hope that it does change, but my fear is that Trump's sort of polarization mission has been so well maintained that I don't think it's as easy as just changing the president and everything falling away. I think that Trump supporters are going to, and we've seen this already, continue with their antagonism towards minority groups. And I think it's just going to be, for now at least, escalated by this belief that the election was somehow stolen from them. I'm hoping that in the next few years, once all of that is resolved, that Americans can heal from this and that the Trump supporters can realize, respect for others is so important. But I'm not too optimistic about that right now. Yeah, Aqeel, I think on your question, I've seen people sort of realize that America's hegemony is nonsensical, but I think that the world is reliant on so much of what America does and says and allows that I don't think that will change too much. I think what happened in Trump presidency, I think, is probably an aversion to Trump, but not necessarily an aversion to America. And I think having Biden and Harris now is sort of, like I said, something more palatable and something that I think the global community can support without feeling like, oh, my citizens are going to call me out because I'm supporting a president that's crazy and tweets insane, inflammatory things all the time. Now it's like I'm supporting a president and a vice president who's dedicated to the American people. So I think that maybe those relations will normalize slightly. And I think my fear, again, is that I think people will stop being critical of America now that they have a normal president, which is not great. And I think that's why conversations like this are necessary, because we have to remind ourselves all the time that there is a really high standard that we need to hold leaders, especially leaders of the world, to. And if they don't meet that standard, we have to be really, really strict on them. So I would love to see, responses in terms of the USA's decision-making powers in global politics, how that would change. And I don't see that changing much, if at all. I think Biden and Harris will probably try to repair some of the tensions that Trump may have ignited or may have broadened. But I don't see a huge shift in America becoming anything else than it was before Trump.
Okay, with that, we have to close this evening's discussion, and I suppose you can keep abreast on Amaarah's Twitter profile, but not only there, I mean, generally, looking at the society that America is and was and where it's headed now. And yes, it does matter because it affects all of us. So we'll discuss this in future, I suppose, and we'll just keep an eye out for, as you said earlier, whether these results will actually be the tell-all of the status quo for the next few years. But with that, we close and we return after the break with a discussion on backpacking, and whether you've been considering it or not, you can be sure to be inspired by our next guest. So we'll be back soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And Amaarah, thanks for your time. We hope to touch base with you so shortly.